With 350 exhibitions, 25 books, and 50 years of shooting, Joel Meyerowitz is considered to be one of the greatest artist street photographers in the world, and he's possibly my favourite street photographer. His style of street shooting is real life, it's raw, it's unmediated. Quite simply, he describes the streets, and that's what I think of as being classical street photography. This guy has an acute vision, a sense of observation, and an eye for detail that many of us would die for. He's got a relaxed and philosophical approach to shooting the streets. It's a kind of calmness combined with a sense of purpose, and that really chimes with me. So these are just some of the reasons he features in this video, which is part of a series on the true masters of street photography.
This is a wonderful street in Siena where people are coming from that side and they're coming from up there and they're coming. It's a crossroads in a way. And I love to stand on a crossroads. When I'm there, the mix of people and energy helps me to be invisible, but also keeps on bringing me new information all the time. So I see new people, a new combination.
Hello Street Snappers, and welcome to the world of Joel Meyerowitz. We all know there are many different styles and approaches to street photography, and for me, this man epitomizes what street photography is all about. Images of random, unmediated encounters in public places, which are usually defined by a moment. And I had thought about calling this video How to Take Pictures Like Joel Meyerowitz, but then I thought, no, just copying somebody else's style is a bit too easy. And it's like walking into a photographic dead end. Having said that, there is lots we can learn from this guy. And in this video, I'll try to unpick Joel's philosophy and some of his methodology for shooting the streets. So he's now well into his 80s. Joel was born in the Bronx in New York, certainly a tough place back then in 1938. He originally studied art and medical illustration, and then in 1962, when he was working for a New York ad agency, he was sent out to oversee an advertising shoot involving the legendary Robert Frank. And it was this experience of watching Frank at work that defined the shape of the rest of Meyerowitz's life. It was a seminal, life-changing moment for him. Talking about that first encounter with Frank, he said, "Robert Frank never said a word to me that day, but he affected me deeply. I walked out there and literally saw the world differently. Everywhere I looked, there was movement, there was colour." So from this point on, he was hooked, and his journey as a street photographer had well and truly begun. Seeing street photography as this exciting new creative outlet, he was quick to join forces with the likes of Tony Ray Jones and Gary Winogrand. But at that time, black and white was the only way, and colour was largely dismissed by the art world and the photographic establishment as being fanciful and anything but serious. Black and white then was the medium, and it was considered to be high art. But Meyerowitz quickly realised that colour was the natural and the more interesting way to represent the world around him. It was able to harness a wider gamut of drama and emotion, and he said that colour describes more things, and I love that quote. He went on to say, colour plays itself out along a richer band of feelings, more wavelengths, more radiance, more sensation. And this bold approach to colour positioned Joel in the recalibrating of colour photography from the margins to the mainstream of art photography. Now, just to divert for a second, if you're liking the look of this guy, you may want to take a look at his online street photography course, which I truly rate, and I'll put a link below. And in the spirit of transparency, I must tell you that I get a few dollars from Joel and his team as a thank you if you sign up using this link. So we've heard about the man, but what can we as street photographers learn from him and from his approach? Now, I could go on all day about what we can learn from Joel Meyerowitz, but I picked out 12 key learning points which could help us all. Firstly, buck the trend. If the world around you says you must shoot in black and white, don't. If the perceived wisdom always says shoot with the sun behind you, don't. Do what feels right. Shoot in a way that connects you with the world, whatever anyone else thinks. Don't listen to Instagram. Do what you want to do. And if we look closely at most of Joel's work, we see that whatever he's shooting, it's a representation of how he connects with the world around him. He, personally, nobody else. So swim against the tide, do your own thing. In this creative world we inhabit, nobody ever achieved much by doing what everybody else does. And this is one of the things that saddens me a bit about street photography today, and we can all see it on Instagram. Too many people are copying each other and doing the same stuff. Then when we do see a spark of originality, it really stands out as being something special. So, point number 2, don't overthink it. You see something, you react, you shoot quickly. Meyerowitz was a spontaneous, quick-reacting photographer. Sure, he would often work the scene, but he never hesitated in nailing that first instinctive shot, which was often the keeper from any little vignette of street life. And I think that if I asked Joel to sum this up in one phrase, he'd say, trust your instinct. So, point number 3, the mundane can be beautiful. Why is it that the best poetry comes out of the most ordinary circumstances? You don't have to have extreme beauty to write beautifully. You don't have to have grand subject matter. I'm not trying to work with grandeur, I'm trying to work with ordinariness. I'm trying to find what spirits me away. Ordinary things. What did I say when I drove by those bungalows? Something about the lives that lived in them. And this is quoting Joel here. And I think this is something that affects us all. We're often guilty of expecting too much and perhaps looking for shots that are too clever or too sophisticated or too complex or just too beautiful. But we do have to be conscious of the detail that's all around us. We're surrounded by detail, and it's our job to make sense of that detail, using these little extra bits of information to add depth and complexity to a frame. Now, having said that, it's our job to construct an interesting frame and maybe finding the unusual in the usual or the extraordinary in the ordinary. And we can all do this. To a certain extent, we're in control and we can make it happen. We can make our own luck. And that's what Joel was very good at doing.
So you have to look for the detail. Sometimes in a great big space, a small detail turns the thing around. And when you see that small detail, you can build a larger picture on the small detail. So consider the detail.
So his 4th tip is change gear. It's good to change gear. Joel is usually associated with his trusty 35mm Leica, which helped him create some of his most memorable and iconic images, but he was a great experimenter. He would try every format known to man, and he'd take great pleasure in trying something different out of his comfort zone and making it work for him. And you could often see him on the street with an 8x10 large format camera precariously balanced on his shoulder on a huge tripod. And that's what I call commitment. So try different formats, get out of your comfort zone, see how each format produces images with a completely different look and feel. Try 120 roll film, try large format if you can. And this change in the tone of voice is creatively refreshing, and it can push you towards new and exciting work. Do try it. So tip number 5 is work hard at your street photography. Joel had such a strong work ethic, and he put his heart and soul into producing his images. Please don't let yourself think that great images like this just fall at your feet every time you work out of the door. You've really got to work at it, really work at it. he was quick to identify the correlation between miles walked and number of keepers. And this is something I stress on my own workshops. And okay, yeah, we sometimes get lucky. And this is one of the true joys of street photography. But you've got to put the effort in. Great images won't constantly fall at your feet. And I love this quote from Gary Player, the golfer, that sums it up quite nicely. The more I practice, the luckier I get. So tip number 6 now is overcome your shyness. And this is something that Joel had to work on in the early days. And he was determined to deal with it during his first real project, which involved shooting bystanders at street parades. And Joel said, nobody thinks there's anything odd about a photographer at a parade, so that gave me invisibility. And I think there's a good tip there. You know, if you are uncomfortable, shoot something where you don't stand out, where it's kind of the norm to be the person there with the camera. And this memorable image was shot in New York in 1963. And Joel said he's saluting the flag that's off camera. It's a superbly unresolved image, but it sets up all kinds of dual tensions. Black, white, genial, fraught, patriotic, unpatriotic. You need to get on the streets and seize the chance moments. So that was a quote from Joel, and again, a great one, another of his pearls of wisdom. But I think we've all come across street photographers who are maybe a bit aggressive, maybe a bit unkind in some way, but Joel is the opposite. He's the embodiment of humility and kindness. And for me, that's how we should be approaching street photography. Now, if you're concerned that street photography does feel a bit uncomfortable or a bit sort of fearsome, and it is for many of us, there are lots of things we can do to overcome that shyness. And you may be interested to watch this earlier video I made about conquering your fears in street photography, and I'll pop a link up here. So on to Joel's next point, which is accept that the moment is now. We all look at great poetic images shot in, say, New York or in the 60s or 70s. And we think to ourselves, if only the world looked like that today. But it doesn't. And we have to remember that in 50 years from now, people will be looking at our images and saying exactly the same thing. Oh, I wish our world looked like that today. Why don't the streets of London look like that anymore? So don't romanticize about the past. Accept that you live in the most interesting moment. Create history by preserving what's in the present moment, what's happening now, for future generations to look at and admire. So what Joel is really saying is it's up to us to create our own little part of history. And I really like that.
Because that's what photography does. It tears a little piece of time out of the whole flow of time. And that piece is identified just with you.
So the next point is, and I think this is a really good one, shoot the streets in colour. When asked why he was using colour, Meyerowitz said, because it describes more things. And when he was asked to elaborate, he said that what he really meant was the sensation he gets from things, believing that colour plays itself out along a richer band of feelings, more wavelengths, more radiance, more sensation. He wanted to see more and experience more from feelings from a photograph. And he wanted bigger images that would describe things more fully, more cohesively. And for him, slow speed colour film provided him with just that. And by about 1972, Joel had excluded black and white altogether from his output, and he was focusing entirely on producing street scenes that forfeited action but retained energy. This was partly because he felt that colour film was responsive to the full spectrum of visible light, while black and white reduced that spectrum to a very narrow wavelength. This stimulates a different set of responses to each medium. Now, I'm paraphrasing Joel here, by the way, and he said that a colour photograph enables you to have feelings along the full wavelength of the spectrum, to retrieve emotions that were perhaps bred into you from infancy, from the warmth and pinkness of your mother's breast, to the loving brown of your puppy's face, the friendly yellow of your pudding. And Joel is describing the emotions that colour brings, and the memories, and the sort of evocations. So grass is green, it's not grey. Flesh is coloured, it's not grey. Black and white is a very cultivated response. So I think Joel was trying to say that black and white is really an abstraction. So if you want to record reality with emotion, you've really got to shoot in colour. And for me, yeah, I agree with it. So on to his next point, which is one that may seem obvious, but always have a camera with you. And even in the very early days, if Joel went for a drive or went to the shops, the camera was on the back seat of the car. If he went for a walk down the street to visit a neighbour, or if he went to the beach, the camera was on his shoulder. No matter where he went, the camera was ever present. And it came from the discipline of carrying a 35mm camera with you at all times. Even in the early years, you never saw him without a camera. He wanted to be in that, he never wanted to be in that position where he had to say, oh, I saw a great shot. If only I had my camera. At that time, no photographer was without a camera. Everybody had a camera with them. And I guess this probably came from Cartier-Bresson's being ready for the decisive moment, and from Robert Frank's travelling everywhere in America and making pictures of the Americans that seemed to occur in the most unexpected moments. But these guys always had a camera with them. So tip number 10 is be persistent. Now, you may be aware that Joel did a big project about 9/11. And in the wake of 9/11, no photographer was able to get anywhere near ground zero to photograph. But Joel was so intent on being able to document this unique historical event that he made it his mission to get hold of a worker's pass, which was eventually granted to him by the New York City Parks Commissioner. And he didn't give up until he got what he wanted. He didn't take no for an answer. And this is the attitude we should all have, particularly when we're planning a documentary project. And I will do a video at some point before long about how we conceive and plan a documentary project. And in projects like this, access is everything. And in part of Joel's Ground Zero project, he networked like crazy, building the right connections, befriending detectives, site workers, and other officials. He said, they got what I was doing. Not one of the art galleries or government officials I contacted for help in gaining access to the site got it, but the cops understood it completely. So his way in was by befriending the cops. And yeah, that's easier said than done. But what I'm trying to get across is the work ethic. He worked hard at getting people on his side. So, next one. The moment trumps perfection. And this is something I try to get across very strongly to my workshop students. And here's what Joel says. When the moment arrives, you need to take a picture of the moment. And often the frame itself isn't a perfect frame. He wasn't looking for a Cartier-Bresson classically organised frame. He found shots with a different kind of energy in them. They were clumsier, bolder, more about the strength of the connection of whatever was going on, and his strength as an artist. But it was not about perfection. And when asked what he thinks an interesting moment is on the streets, he would say, I was struggling to be in the moment, how close to get to somebody. How do I understand that there is significance? Sometimes the tip-off is that it's a joke, a witty observation, or sometimes even philosophy. So maybe we should just shoot first and think later. Try to make order out of the chaos on the streets. Take your instinctive shot, react instinctively to what's going on around you, record moments, connect with the world, but get that instinctive shot first. And then think about working the scene. Then think about how you can do it differently or better. And finally, just do it. When Joel started to shoot the streets almost 60 years ago, the first question he asked himself was, how do I choose what to shoot? He was overwhelmed. There was too much material. The streets, the intense flow of people, the light ever changing. He couldn't get the camera to work quickly enough. It was it kind of paralyzed him, and he had to learn to identify exactly what he was responding to, if his response was any good. And he said, the only way to do that is to take pictures, print them, look hard at them, and discuss them with other people. And what he's really stressing here is the power and value of critique.
So one of the most difficult things many people feel is how to talk about a photograph. What do you say? That's nice, that's beautiful, that's pretty. That isn't enough.
So there you have it. As you probably guessed, I'm a big fan of Joel Meyerowitz, and I think he's brought so much to the world of street photography. If you'd like to dig a little deeper, I can strongly recommend this book, which is called Where I Find Myself, and I will link to it below. But this pretty much sums up Joel's career to date. It's a terrific book. And I mentioned his online workshops earlier, which it's just brilliant and well worth a look. And again, I'll pop a link below. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you again next time. There's been a bit of a gap between this and the previous video, and I'm sorry for that, but with the world coming back to life and everything's changed in the last 4 or 6 weeks, we've all had quite a lot to deal with, and kind of bringing the business back to life, getting all the workshops scheduled again for the rest of this year and into next year. It's been quite a mammoth task, and it's taken all my time, but I will be back soon with another video. So again, thanks for tuning in, and bye for now.